Imagine you're sitting in a high-stakes corporate meeting. The kind where the stakes feel enormous, the PowerPoint slides are full of color-coded charts, and every single person in the room is nodding along with the kind of confident, knowing expression that says, "Yes, I absolutely understand all of this." The room is buzzing with talk of operational synergy, disruptive pivots, and leveraging multi-channel ecosystems to maximize stakeholder alignment. People are using words like granular and actionable and holistic framework, and the nodding never stops. It's a room full of extremely well-dressed people performing the most expensive pantomime you've ever witnessed. And then it happens. The person everyone in the room privately agrees is the most brilliant mind in the building. Maybe a world-renowned engineer, maybe the company's most decorated strategist, slowly raises their hand. The nodding stops. The room goes quiet. Everyone leans in slightly, expecting something profound, a breakthrough insight, a stunning synthesis of everything that's just been said. Instead, they ask a question so basic it makes the air go still. "Wait," they say, looking genuinely puzzled. "Before we go any further, can someone actually explain what we mean by operational synergy in this specific project? Because I'm not confident any of us are talking about the same thing." A few people shift in their seats. Someone in the back almost smirks. The meeting chair clears their throat awkwardly. And in that moment, to a casual observer, the genius looks like they've completely lost their edge. Or worse, like they don't understand the basics of the business they've spent 20 years building. But here's the secret that almost nobody in that room will ever admit. That single question, that awkward, stupid, career-risking question, is the most intelligent thing said in that entire meeting. Because while everyone else was busy performing the theater of understanding, nodding along so they wouldn't look lost, this one person was doing something rare and genuinely courageous. They were refusing to pretend. They were stripping away the jargon to find the actual truth underneath it, and they were willing to look foolish to do it. This is the central paradox we are exploring today. Why do highly intelligent people so often appear confused, quiet, awkward, or even outright foolish in everyday social situations? Why does the person with the sharpest mind in the room so frequently look like the most out-of-touch person in it? As it turns out, our society has built a very specific set of mental shortcuts for judging intelligence. We use confidence. We use speed of speech. We use social conformity and fluency and the ability to talk without pausing. And these shortcuts, the very signals we've been conditioned to trust, are often the exact opposite of how a deeply intelligent brain actually operates. Today, we're going to go deep. We're going to look at the psychology of intellectual humility. We're going to examine a cognitive trap so pervasive that it affects everyone from Nobel laureates to kindergarten teachers. We're going to look at why the smartest people in any room are often the most socially awkward, and why that awkwardness is not a bug in their programming. It's a feature. By the end of this, you won't just understand why the genius asks the stupid question. You'll understand why asking that question might be the single most important thing any of us could ever learn to do. To understand why intelligent people look like fools, we need to go back to a sun-drenched marketplace in ancient Athens, over 2,000 years ago. Because this paradox is not new. In fact, it is one of the oldest and most documented phenomena in the entire history of human thought. The man at the center of it was Socrates. Socrates is often called the father of Western philosophy, the man who essentially invented critical thinking as a discipline. He's also, depending on how you look at it, the man who got sentenced to death for being annoying at dinner parties. Here's how the story goes. The oracle at Delphi, the most respected source of divine wisdom in the ancient world, declared that Socrates was the wisest man in all of Athens. When Socrates heard this, his reaction was not pride or satisfaction. It was genuine bafflement. He believed he knew nothing at all. The oracle, he was certain, had made a catastrophic error. So he did what any truly curious person would do. He set out to prove the oracle wrong. He went to the men Athens considered its greatest minds, its poets, its politicians, its master craftsmen, its generals. He interviewed them. He asked them careful, probing questions. And what he found everywhere he looked was the same unsettling pattern. These wise men had genuine expertise in one specific area. The master craftsman truly knew his craft. The general truly understood military strategy. But because of that expertise, they had convinced themselves that their knowledge extended to everything else, to ethics, to governance, to the nature of justice and beauty and truth. They walked around radiating the kind of certainty that only comes from never truly examining what you believe. Socrates called this conceited ignorance, and he found it everywhere he looked. Finally, after this exhaustive tour through the intellectual elite of one of the greatest civilizations in history, Socrates arrived at a conclusion that would echo through 2,000 years of philosophy. He was, in fact, the wisest, not because he knew more, but because he was the only one humble enough to admit how little he knew. "I know that I know nothing," he said, and he meant it. This is called Socratic ignorance. In modern psychology, it's the bedrock of what researchers call intellectual humility, and decades of cognitive science have confirmed that it is one of the most reliable predictors of genuine intelligence and sound reasoning. Here's why this matters for our story today. In modern life, we are under enormous social pressure to appear certain. In a boardroom, at a dinner party, in a job interview, on social media, admitting uncertainty is frequently treated as a confession of incompetence. The unspoken social contract says, if you don't know, pretend you do. If you're confused, nod. If you're lost, look interested. But for a genuinely intelligent person, this contract is almost physically impossible to honor. Because for them, accuracy isn't just a preference, it's a moral priority. When a smart person says, "I don't know," they are not revealing a gap in their knowledge. They are revealing an awareness of what philosophers call the known unknowns. The vast, complex territory of things they understand well enough to know they don't fully understand yet. The average person doesn't see this gap. They can't see it. That's what makes the intelligent person look like a fool. They're stopping to look at the complexity that everyone else has decided to walk right past. They appear foolish because they refuse to participate in the social ritual of what we might call performative certainty, the collective agreement to pretend we all know more than we do. While the crowd follows the person who projects the most confidence, the genuinely wise person is the one asking the stupid question that, if anyone stopped long enough to think about it, would break the entire illusion of consensus. And here's the uncomfortable truth that no one wants to say out loud. Most meetings, most conversations, most moments of collective decision-making are held together by exactly this illusion. Everyone is nodding. Nobody actually understands. The person who breaks that spell doesn't look smart. They look disruptive. They look naive. They look like they didn't do their homework. But they're the only one in the room doing real thinking. Okay, so we've established that genuinely intelligent people tend to be more comfortable admitting uncertainty than the rest of us. But this raises an obvious question. If that's true, why don't we recognize it? Why don't we look at the person asking the stupid question and think, that must be the smartest person in the room? The answer to that is one of the most famous findings in the entire history of modern psychology. In 1999, two researchers at Cornell University, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, published a paper that would eventually become one of the most cited studies in the field. The study looked at why incompetent people are so often spectacularly overconfident. And what they found was not just fascinating, it was deeply unsettling. They discovered what they called a dual burden. People who are genuinely poor at something, whether it's logical reasoning, grammar, chess, or humor, tend to dramatically overestimate their own ability in that area. They rate themselves as significantly above average even when their actual performance puts them near the bottom of the scale. But here's the crucial part. This isn't arrogance. It's not even self-deception in the traditional sense. It's a structural cognitive problem. People who lack competence in a specific domain also lack the very metacognitive skills, the self-awareness and analytical capacity they would need to recognize their own incompetence. They can't see their own blind spots because the blind spot and the inability to see it are the same thing. Think about that friend who is absolutely convinced they are a world-class cook, a natural comedian, or a masterful driver, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. They're not lying to you when they express that confidence. They literally cannot perceive the gap between their self-image and their actual performance. That's the first half of Dunning-Kruger, and it explains why we so easily mistake confidence for competence. Because the most confidently wrong people in any room feel their confidence as deeply and genuinely as anyone else. But here's the second half, the part that almost never gets discussed because it's far more uncomfortable. As people become more genuinely expert in a field, as their actual competence deepens and matures, something unexpected happens to their confidence. It drops, Not because they're becoming less capable, but because they're becoming more aware. They start to see the nuances they missed before, the exceptions, the edge cases, the ways their earlier models were wrong or incomplete, the vast territories of the discipline they haven't even touched yet. And crucially, they see all this, but the people around them can't. So what we end up with is a tragic inversion. The person who knows the least feels the most certain. The person who knows the most feels the most uncertain. And because our social environments treat confidence as a proxy for competence, we systematically reward the wrong end of this spectrum. We follow the loudest person in the room. We give the keynote slot to the one who never hesitates. We promote the manager who projects certainty even in situations that call for nuance and caution. And meanwhile, the person who actually knows the terrain, who has spent years mapping every caveat, every contradiction, every place where the simple answer breaks down, sits quietly in the corner, carefully weighing variables, and gets passed over because they seem unsure. Charles Darwin, who understood this dynamic intuitively, put it precisely: ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. What Dunning and Kruger gave us was the scientific proof. The intelligent person looks like a fool because they have arrived at a level of understanding sophisticated enough to recognize how much they don't know. The fool looks like a genius because they haven't gotten there yet. And in a world that judges books by their covers, the cover of confidence wins almost every time. Have you ever had a brilliant teacher who was completely useless at actually teaching? You know the type. They're clearly one of the sharpest people you've ever met. Ask them a question and you can see them thinking at a speed that makes your head spin. But the moment they try to explain something, really explain it, to someone who doesn't already know it, everything falls apart. They skip steps. They use vocabulary that only makes sense if you already understand the concept they're trying to teach. They look genuinely baffled that you're confused, because to them, the logic is so obvious it barely seems worth spelling out. This is not a failure of intelligence. It's something far more specific and far more interesting. Psychologists call it the curse of knowledge. It's one of the most powerful and least understood cognitive biases in human psychology, and once you see it, you'll never stop seeing it. The definitive experiment comes from Stanford University in 1990, conducted by doctoral student Elizabeth Newton. She divided a group of participants into two roles, tappers and listeners. The tappers were given a list of 25 well-known songs, things like Happy Birthday, The Star-Spangled Banner, Jingle Bells. Their job was to pick a song, tap its rhythm on a table with their finger, and then predict how likely it was that a listener would be able to name the song just from the tapping. The tappers predicted that listeners would identify the song about 50% of the time. Half the time, they thought, the rhythm alone would be enough. The reality, the listeners guessed correctly just 2.5% of the time. That's a gap between expectation and reality so enormous it's almost hard to take seriously. 50% versus 2.5%. How is that possible? Here's why. When a tapper is tapping out the rhythm of Happy Birthday, they are not hearing a series of disconnected taps. They are hearing the full song, the melody, the harmonics, the lyrics, the memories associated with it, the birthday cake, the whole experience. The rhythm they're tapping is just the surface of a rich, full, three-dimensional musical experience happening entirely inside their head. But the listener, they hear taps, that's it, no melody, no context, just tap, 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 disconnected thuds with no referent. The tapper cannot unhear the song. Once you know a piece of music, you cannot return to the state of not knowing it. So they assume, completely unconsciously, completely sincerely, that the listener must also be hearing something close to what they're hearing, that the signal must be close to obvious. How could anyone not get it? This is the curse of knowledge. Once you know something, once it's truly integrated into how you understand the world, you lose the ability to remember what it was like not to know it. The gap between you and the person who doesn't know it becomes genuinely invisible to you. Now apply this to intelligence. Highly intelligent people have spent years or decades accumulating knowledge. They've built mental models of extraordinary complexity and sophistication. They've integrated frameworks, historical context, scientific principles, and edge cases into a unified, richly textured understanding of their domain. When they speak, they're tappers. They're outputting what feels to them like the obvious surface of a much richer internal understanding. They're skipping steps not because they're condescending, but because those steps have become so automatic and so integrated that they genuinely can't see them anymore. To the listener, the person who hasn't spent those years building those models, what comes out is a series of disconnected, confusing taps. Jargon that assumes a foundation that hasn't been laid. Logical leaps across gaps that the speaker doesn't even see as gaps. And so the expert, the brilliant professor, the world-class engineer, the master-level practitioner appears to be out of touch, eccentric, absent-minded, unable to have a normal conversation, unable to explain even the basics of what they do. They aren't any of those things. They're just cursed by their own expertise. And the cruelest irony is that the deeper their knowledge, the wider the gap and the more foolish they appear to people who don't have the context to see what's actually happening. Let me paint a picture for you. You're out at a restaurant with a group of friends. It's a casual Saturday evening, nothing high stakes, nothing complicated. The menus arrive. Within 2 minutes, most people at the table have closed their menus and started chatting. They found something that looked good, ordered it, and moved on with their lives. But one person at the table is still reading. 10 minutes later, they're still reading. They're cross-referencing the pasta section with the specials board on the wall. They're asking the server detailed questions about whether the risotto is made to order or pre-prepared. They're doing a rough calculation of caloric value versus price point, and mentally weighing the opportunity cost of the salmon against the fact that they had fish last Thursday. The table is getting mildly impatient. Someone makes a joke. The smart one doesn't notice because they're still genuinely troubled by the choice between the steak and the mushroom gnocchi. To everyone watching, this looks like an absurd, almost comical failure of basic practical judgment. It's a restaurant, just pick something. But what's actually happening in that person's head is something that psychologists have studied extensively, and it reveals something profound about how highly intelligent people process decisions. In the 1950s, economist and Nobel laureate Herbert Simon introduced a concept that would eventually become one of the most important frameworks in behavioral science. He distinguished between two fundamentally different decision-making strategies, satisficing and maximizing. A satisficer sets a threshold. They decide what good enough looks like, and they pick the first option that clears that bar. This is efficient, low stress, and importantly, it works well in most everyday situations where good enough is genuinely sufficient. A maximizer does something very different. They don't set a threshold. They're compelled to evaluate all the options and find the single best one. Not just a good choice, the optimal choice. The one that, in retrospect, would be the best choice they could have made given all available information. Here's the thing about maximizers. They tend to make objectively better choices, on average, than satisficers. But they pay an enormous psychological price for it. Studies consistently show that maximizers experience higher levels of decision-related anxiety, more post-decision regret, and significantly lower overall life satisfaction, even when their decisions turn out well, because they're always wondering whether there was a better option they didn't choose. Intelligent people, almost by definition, tend to skew toward maximizing, not because they've decided to, but because their brains are wired to see complexity. Where a satisficer sees 2 reasonable options, a maximizer sees 17 variables, 12 potential consequences, 8 risk factors, and a web of trade-offs that extends 3 decisions into the future. This is genuinely useful when the stakes are high. When you're choosing a clinical trial design, or structuring a major business decision, or writing legislation. The ability to see and carefully weigh all of those variables is exactly what you want in the room. But in a casual restaurant on a Saturday night, the same capacity becomes a liability. The stakes don't match the mental machinery being deployed. And to observers who can't see inside that machinery, what they see is not a carefully processing intellect. They see a grown adult who can't decide what to eat. They see a fool. What's really happening is something far more interesting, an excess of logic applied to a low-stakes scenario. A superpower running in the wrong context, producing outputs that look a lot like paralysis. The foolishness is not in the thinking, it's in the mismatch between the tool and the task. And the painful irony? The maximizer doesn't win by finding the best sandwich. They lose by giving up time, social capital, and mental energy in a battle that was never worth fighting. But try telling that to a brain that genuinely cannot stop processing. We live in a world that has developed a deeply irrational relationship with speed. In conversation, Speed is treated as a proxy for intelligence in a way that's so thoroughly embedded in our social expectations that most of us have never stopped to question it. The person who can fire off a witty comeback in a split second, who answers complex questions without hesitation, who never seems to need a moment to think. We intuitively, automatically, and almost universally rate that person as more intelligent than the person who pauses. But research into what cognitive scientists call response latency tells a very different story. When you ask a deeply analytical thinker a substantial question, something important happens before they answer. They process it fully. They run it through multiple cognitive filters simultaneously. They're checking the accuracy of potential answers. They're evaluating the precision of their word choices. They're considering the subtle implications of being wrong and the ways their answer might be misinterpreted or oversimplified. They pause 3 seconds, 4 seconds, sometimes 5. In a social setting, in a meeting, on a date, in a job interview, on a panel, that silence is brutally uncomfortable for observers. We've been conditioned to fill silence, to read silence as uncertainty, to interpret hesitation as an absence of knowledge. Studies show that when people are rated on perceived intelligence and likability, response latency is one of the most powerful predictors, and not in the direction you'd hope. Longer pauses consistently lead to lower ratings on both dimensions, even when the actual content of the answer is demonstrably more accurate and more sophisticated. Think about what that means. We are actively and systematically penalizing the behavior that produces better answers. The person who speaks first, even if they're wrong, often wins the perception game. The person who takes the time to be right is perceived as slow, as uncertain, as a little dim, even. This is not trivial. It has real consequences in every domain where intelligent people operate. In academic settings, it means the students who speak up quickly are perceived as more capable, regardless of what they say. In business settings, it means the fast-talking decision-maker is given more authority than the careful analyst. In social settings, it means the quick-witted but shallow conversationalist is considered more intellectually impressive than the quiet thinker who says something genuinely worth hearing when they finally speak. What we've built is a social evaluation system that optimizes for confidence and speed at the direct expense of accuracy and depth. And within that system, the intelligent person, the one who processes before they speak, who values getting it right over getting it out fast, will always look like the slower, less impressive option. They look foolish not because they are. They look foolish because they're playing a different game. A game where the goal is truth, not status. A game where accuracy matters more than the appearance of certainty. A game where the pause before the answer is not an admission of ignorance. It's evidence of a brain taking the question seriously. But the crowd doesn't see the game they're playing. It only sees the pause. So far, we've been looking at this paradox through the lens of behavior, the things intelligent people do that get misread as foolishness. But to truly understand why this happens at the deepest level, we have to look at the neurobiology itself, at the actual wiring of a mind that processes the world differently. In gifted education and developmental psychology, there's a concept called asynchronous development. It describes something that researchers have observed consistently across populations of high-ability individuals. A person's intellectual development very frequently outpaces their emotional, social, and practical development by a significant margin. This isn't a metaphor. It's a genuine developmental reality. A 10-year-old with the intellectual capacity of a 17-year-old still has the emotional regulation of a 10-year-old. A 25-year-old who is doing the conceptual work of a 40-year-old in their field may still feel socially uncertain, out of place, and somehow fundamentally wrong in most social environments. The development is real, but it's uneven. It moves at different speeds in different domains. And this unevenness creates what psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski described as a hyperreactive central nervous system. A nervous system that is, in every measurable sense, more active than average, more responsive, more sensitive, more alive in a way that comes with extraordinary capacities and extraordinary costs. Gifted individuals, Dabrowski found, don't just think more intensely than average. They feel more intensely. They sense more intensely. Their brains are, quite literally, doing more work, processing more stimuli, making more connections, holding more variables in active consideration at any given moment. And that intensity bleeds into everything: their emotional responses, their sensory experiences, their moral concerns. This leads to what we might call the humanitarian irony. A highly intelligent person might spend their days genuinely, deeply agonized by global problems, climate change, inequality, the suffering of people they've never met in places they've never been. They soak up world pain in a way that can be almost physically overwhelming. And yet, precisely because they are so absorbed in these enormous concerns, they may seem cold, distant, or absent to the people closest to them. The partner who wanted to talk about dinner plans, the colleague who just needed a quick answer. They're not cold, they're somewhere else entirely. And from the outside, that distance looks a lot like social ineptitude. There's also a deep and well-documented split between what the ancient Greeks called episteme, theoretical, propositional knowledge, and phronses, practical wisdom, the knowledge of how to act effectively in the world. These two things don't always develop together. In fact, in highly gifted individuals, they often diverge spectacularly. A theoretical physicist who can describe the precise moment of the Big Bang, who understands the mathematics of space-time curvature, who has spent 20 years solving problems that exist at the very edge of human comprehension, may genuinely forget to buy milk, may lose their keys with stunning regularity, may show up to an important meeting without having booked a flight to get there. These failures are real. They're not strategic or performative. They are the product of a brain that has allocated its extraordinary resources to a different set of priorities, leaving ordinary practical functioning underpowered and unreliable. And society's response to this, we call them absent-minded. We call them impractical. We shake our heads and say they can't handle the real world. As if the real world they're navigating, the one that exists in their mind, the one full of equations and frameworks and connections and moral dilemmas, and the full weight of human complexity, is somehow less real than remembering to pay the electric bill. Now I want to take a step back from the science for a moment, because there's a deeper cultural story here that the psychology alone can't fully capture. Throughout history, across cultures and centuries and radically different belief systems, there has always been a specific role, a recognized archetype, for the person who ignores the rules of social performance to reveal a deeper truth, who refuses to play the game of appearances, who looks like a fool so that wisdom can speak freely. In medieval Europe, this was the court jester. Think about what the jester's role actually was. Here is a person, dressed in motley, ridiculous, deliberately absurd, whose explicit function was to make the king and his court look foolish, to mock the powerful, to point out what no one else dared say, to ask the questions that anyone with a reputation to protect would never risk. And crucially, they were allowed to do it. The foolishness of the jester, the bells, the costume, the pratfalls, was a social license. It was a way of saying, I have nothing to protect. I have no reputation to lose. Therefore, I am the only one free enough to tell you the truth. The jester wasn't actually foolish. The jester was the most politically sophisticated person in the room. See the same archetype in entirely different traditions. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is a lineage of teachers known as the divine madmen, Nyernpa in Tibetan, which translates roughly as holy fools. These figures deliberately flouted social convention, sometimes dramatically and scandalously, specifically to break the rigid mental habits of their students. They used apparent madness as a teaching tool, a shock to the system designed to dislodge certainty and open the mind to a different way of seeing. In Eastern Orthodox Christianity, there is a parallel tradition called fools for Christ, figures who lived in poverty and apparent disgrace, who dressed in rags and spoke in riddles, specifically so that the wealthy and powerful could not categorize them or dismiss them or hold their reputation over them. Their foolishness was the source of their freedom. What all of these traditions understood, and what our modern, efficiency-obsessed world has largely forgotten, is that the performance of competence and the practice of wisdom are not just different things. They are often actively opposed. To look wise is to conform. To look wise is to use the right vocabulary, to project confidence, to meet people's expectations about what a smart person sounds and looks and acts like. And all of that conformity costs something. It costs freedom. It costs the ability to ask the question no one else will ask, to say the thing that makes everyone uncomfortable, to challenge the assumption that the entire room has unconsciously agreed to protect. Many highly intelligent people today, perhaps without fully articulating it, lean into their eccentricities for precisely this reason. They've discovered, through years of being out of sync with the social environment around them, that the role of the apparent fool provides a form of freedom that conformity never could. If you've already given up on being seen as appropriately put together, you have nothing left to lose. And when you have nothing left to lose, you can ask anything. This is what the ancient archetype was always really about, the liberation that comes from releasing the performance, from letting go of the social contract that says you must appear a certain way to be taken seriously. The fool is the only one free enough to speak the truth, and sometimes the most intelligent person in the room is the one willing to be mistaken for a fool to get there. Now, it would be incomplete and frankly dishonest to talk about why intelligent people look like fools without acknowledging a crucial dimension of this story. Because the experience we've been describing is not equally distributed. The costs of appearing intelligent are not borne equally by everyone. There is a phenomenon in organizational psychology called tall poppy syndrome. It describes a pattern observed across cultures, particularly in group-oriented or consensus-driven societies, of actively cutting down anyone who grows too tall above the average. Anyone who stands out too far, who demonstrates ability or success that separates them from the peer group, becomes a target for social punishment. The mechanism is about threat. High intelligence and genuine competence are socially destabilizing. They challenge the implicit consensus that everyone is roughly equal. They make other people feel inadequate. And one of the most effective ways to neutralize that threat without ever having to acknowledge it explicitly is to label the intelligent person weird, difficult, impractical, or yes, a fool. This is not always conscious. Often it's not. But the effect is real and well documented. Highly capable people are frequently pressured through social sanction to dim themselves, to perform mediocrity, to participate in the collective downward leveling because the alternative, being fully what they are, is too socially costly. And if the general cost is high, the cost for gifted women is often devastating. Patriarchal norms have historically constructed a very specific model of what acceptable female intelligence looks like. It is quiet, it is modest, it is emotionally contained and relationally warm. It defers to others, it does not push back, it does not dominate intellectual space. And it certainly does not display the kind of analytical intensity, relentless focus, or intellectual combativeness that we're perfectly happy to call brilliant in a man. When a woman displays those same traits, she encounters a very different social response. She is too much. She is intimidating. She is difficult or aggressive. She is cold, or perhaps most cruelly, not a team player. The data here is not subtle. Studies on meeting dynamics consistently show that women are interrupted more often than men. That women's ideas are more frequently taken up by others and credited to those others. That women who speak as much as their male counterparts are rated as speaking more. That women who express the same level of confidence as male colleagues are rated as less likable and less competent. In this environment, many gifted women develop what psychologists call a false self, a carefully constructed social persona that hides analytical clarity, intellectual ambition, and the full power of their capabilities behind a more socially acceptable presentation. They learn to slow down, to soften, to pad their most acute observations with enough hedges and qualifications that they feel manageable. They dumb themselves down, not because they want to, but because the social cost of not doing so is too high. Careers stall, relationships fracture, opportunities evaporate. The tragedy of the false self is not just personal, it's collective. Imagine what we lose as organizations, as communities, as a civilization, every time a brilliant woman decides it's safer not to show what she's actually capable of. Imagine the problems left unsolved, the discoveries delayed, the leadership never offered. This is the quiet cost of a world that mistakes social conformity for intelligence and punishes brilliance whenever it doesn't come in the right package. So, what have we actually learned today? We've learned that Socrates, the wisest man in Athens, became wise by being willing to admit he was ignorant. We've learned that Dunning and Kruger showed us a world where the most confident people are often the least competent, and the most genuinely capable people are often the most quietly uncertain. We've learned that the curse of knowledge makes experts invisible to themselves, unable to bridge the gap between what they know and what they can communicate. We've learned that the maximizer's trap catches intelligent minds in spirals of decision-making that look like foolishness from the outside, but are actually an excess of logical sophistication. We've learned that the simple, 5-second pause before a careful answer costs a person more in perceived intelligence than getting it completely wrong would. We've learned that gifted minds are often wired at a different frequency, more intense, more asynchronous, more sensitive to complexity, in ways that create extraordinary internal worlds but deeply awkward external presentations. And we've learned that from the court jester to the holy fool, history has always known that the only person truly free enough to tell the truth is the one willing to look like an idiot doing it. Here is the conclusion that brings all of this together. We live in a world that prizes the theater of performance. We reward jargon and speed and confidence and social fluency. We have built a civilization where looking smart is frequently more profitable than being smart, where the performance of knowledge outcompetes the actual thing. But true intelligence is often quiet. It's often slow. It's often hesitant. It's often willing to look like a simpleton, willing to ask the obvious question, to sit with uncertainty, to admit confusion, if doing so means getting one step closer to something real. The foolish behavior of the highly intelligent, the overthinking, the awkward silences, the basic questions that break the spell of false consensus, the social asynchrony, these are not defects. They are symptoms of a mind processing the world in higher resolution than the people around it. While everyone else is making decisions based on a low-detail sketch, the intelligent person is trying to navigate a complex, multi-dimensional map. And here is perhaps the most important thing I can say today. Wisdom and foolishness are not opposites. They are partners in the same dance. The willingness to look foolish, to genuinely not know, to ask the question that makes everyone else uncomfortable, to pause in a culture that celebrates speed, is not a failure of intelligence. It is one of intelligence's highest expressions. As Shakespeare put it in King Lear, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." So, the next time you're in a room where everyone is nodding, where the jargon is flying and the confidence is high and the consensus is settled, I want you to hold a question in your mind. Do I actually understand what's happening here, or am I performing understanding? Because if you don't understand and you stay quiet, you're protecting your reputation. But if you speak, if you ask the awkward question, if you break the spell, if you're willing to look like the foolish one for a moment, you might be the most intelligent person in the room. You just have to be brave enough to look like you're not. If this exploration of the hidden paradoxes of intelligence has shifted something for you, if you're looking at your own moments of hesitation, your own basic questions, your own social awkwardness with a little more curiosity and a little less embarrassment, then you're already doing the thing this entire video was about. Sit with that, reflect on your own wise folly, the moments when you knew enough to know you didn't know, the times you asked the question nobody else would ask. And if you want to keep exploring the hidden mechanics of the human mind, one paradox, one uncomfortable truth, one counterintuitive insight at a time, subscribe. We'll be here asking the stupid questions together. Thanks for watching.